Good morning, NIHSS family, HSS family. It is a special morning. It is our third encounter, and today I am encountering someone who I think is larger than life, who has challenged me to read a book more than twice, more than 3 times. Read it, put it aside, a bit of tears here and there, come back to it, read it, get angry, read it again and think, I want to do something, I want to do something. I am honored to be sitting today with Jamil. Jamil is the winner of the HSS Awards 2020 in the nonfiction category for in the biography section, and I'm sure some of you who know me very well know that at this point my voice is shaking, and I'm nervous. That's my voice shaking. I don't know. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. It is there's a moment that I've been waiting for. I think for quite a while. I met with Jamil at Maruping, our heritage site, the night of the awards. And the moment I met Jamil, I knew that one day I'll have this opportunity, and thanks to Jakana for making sure that the book sees the light of day. And the moment has arrived, and it is a beautiful book. And the cover is also very provocative. I think it speaks of the life of Jamil. It's called Khamer, The Makings of a Vater Slums. Jamil, thank you so much for being here this morning.
Thank you for having me here.
I'm almost tempted to say thank you for existing in this country. Thank you for your life. Thank you for being brave to share it with all of us. Let me start with risky questions. Risky questions. These are not my questions. So if the question is bad, just know that it's not my question. I'm asking on behalf of others. Let's start with pronouns.
Yes.
They're a big issue. It is an important, at least, discussion in South Africa. I think it's a growing discussion that most of us, some of us, have never really grappled with. And it is also a sensitive question because you don't know how to even ask the question. So,
right.
Pronouns, where do you stand on the pronouns? Big debate, and how would you want me to introduce you, or how would you introduce yourself?
So, where I stand, I think it's an important change in our ways of social interaction, and it's important for the reason that I don't think people who find themselves comfortable with normative gender and sexuality, I don't think people understand or realize just how much those who have not been comfortable in normative gender and sexuality have to fight, not only with people, and society at large, but with themselves, to actually get to a point of saying, oh, this is actually who I am, right? So before you even meet this person, and this conversation of pronouns come up, remember that they have been through a long struggle within themselves for this. So to finally get to the point where you can say, this is who I am, the least that everybody else can do is to acknowledge that person that you are presenting to them at that moment. And so it's absolutely imperative that we try hard. And that's what we are doing, and what we can do is try. And it doesn't, there's a lot of urgency. There's urgency around this because it relates to harm in the way that the consequences for either misgendering or not acknowledging people come about. But it's important to always keep on trying. And so personally, I mean, all my life I've been socialized as he, and I still use he because I don't believe that that's the exclusive property of masculinity. And quite frankly, it is something that I've lived with for a long time. It is not something I necessarily want to let go of. And I also respond to they. But I mean, I actually had a conversation about this yesterday. I did leadership training on queerness in the workplace, and I mean, my suggestion is always lead the conversation with your own pronouns. So if you meet somebody and you introduce yourself, you say, "Hi, I'm Sarah. My pronouns are this, that. What are yours?" Very simple, very easy. You invite somebody in instead of assuming, making a mistake, and having an awkward moment, right?
Okay. All right. It sounds like I was in your training session yesterday, because I wanted to start with that so that there's no awkwardness and I don't start off in the wrong way. Let me also ask you another question. October was a special month.
Yeah.
We always say it's we celebrate all sexualities and what does it have any meaning for you?
I think it does. Personally, it does have meaning to me, but I don't think the meaning that it has to me is what often occupies other people's minds. So for me, I am always very specific and mindful of the origins of an I want to say an occasion, but it's not an occasion. You know, it's an ongoing set of realizations and events. But what we call pride, for me, it's always top of mind that this was born out of resistance to police brutality, to just violence against queer people in general in society. The fact that it was led by black and brown trans women and lesbians. You know, there are very important conversations to have there about the lives that are most at risk and why it is first and foremost every year always a march, you know, a demonstration in resistance. And I think sometimes it does get a little bit, you know, cloudy. The meaning gets a little bit cloudy because yes, there's also celebration attached to that, which is important, right? We are not just receptacles of trauma and pain all the time. We also have fun. We also, you know, show up as happy and elated in all of these things, which is important. But when it's only that, then we are missing an opportunity to remind everybody of the fact that this is, number one, historically about a protest against brutality, and currently still, because it hasn't stopped, it hasn't changed as much as it should have. Yeah.
Reading your story, and it is a snapshot, right? You still are becoming.
Right.
And you would write another biography in 10 years' time and relive some of your moments.
Thank you for giving me 10 years. It's very generous of you. Everybody wants it like yesterday.
Oh, okay. I also wanted yesterday. I'll make sure that I have a conversation with Bridget from Jacana and we can work something out. So one of the things that I appreciated about your story is how much we think that the gay community is a homogenous community. Right. They all look the same. We come from different races and class, and that's something that you also grapple with. But geography is also important. Cape Town.
Yeah.
It used to be described as the most welcoming, right, of all people. Your story somehow negates that or challenges that a bit. How is Cape Town, and how do you think that we should try to embrace the differences inside the gay community?
So I think first and foremost, the romance around Cape Town as a destination is horribly misplaced. I think it's if you want to think about Cape Town, you want to analyze Cape Town and where it is now versus where it comes from. We have to remember that this was, in the history of this country as we know it today, one of the first sites of violence. Cape Town was that place. The fact that that is the site where slavery occurred. Now, when you put that place in that context, and you try and trace a trajectory, you realize there's no way, at least not with serious work, that a place can outlive such a legacy. And so that idea of it being the most welcoming has to do with who, first and foremost, is considered the right kind of person. Those are the people who are welcomed, right? They are white people, they are heterosexual people. Those are the people for whom Cape Town opens up. Also, wealthy people. Yeah, you don't necessarily have to be South African, but you have to have money. And so, one's experience as not being all of those things is a very different thing to what you see on the brochure and what Cape Town would like to sell itself as. But you know, to get to the other part of your question, just like we have with many other sort of sects of difference, right? We understand this idea of a particular grouping of people being diverse within this grouping, right? And finally, though, when we talk about queer communities, or particularly because there isn't that much investment into complexifying those people, right? Because when you complexify people, you have to think a little bit harder, you have to do a little bit more. But if it is that we understand all other groupings to be complex, to have contestations, to be undecided about things, it's a similar thing like within with women who are feminists, who consider themselves feminists. So in those communities, there's this expectation that, but you must all agree on the same thing then, if you are going to form this collective that resists this system, right? And giving people the opportunity to also work with their own complexities is one way of acknowledging that people are human. So in exemplifying or sort of exceptionalizing certain groups, the irony is that we end up erasing their complexity to once again make them this one thing that can be explained in a simple sentence. And can then, once we've explained it, we can move on. Because that's the biggest motivation in South Africa specifically, right? We want to move on from everything. We never want to just be here where this thing is happening. And we're not going to move on for as long as what we erase those complexities.
I now know why you define yourself as a deviant. Your sense of agency comes through very strongly in the book, and defying a context of alcoholism. You know, I also come from a community where alcoholism is just a daily reality. You make sense of it in your own way, and I want you to just share with me how that lived experience of alcoholism shaped the person that you are and the stories that you tell in the book.
You know, the thing about, and it's in my case, it's specifically alcoholism, but it's substance abuse more generally. And the thing that you know, that level of substance abuse does, the person engaging in that is looking for a way to escape a particular kind of reality. And in escaping that, they become unavailable to those who they are supposed to be in relation with. And so for me, with my father, that relationship, in some ways, it impacted me, number one, in ways such as realizing that I can't rely on people. They will disappoint me. And I have to find a way to make sure that I am the person that can fulfill all my needs first, as far as possible. And later on, if there might be some, a few things that somebody else can help me with, then I'll consider it, right? But it's also then made, that in itself perpetuates a cycle of not forming relations, right? You don't want to form relationships with people because you're convinced that they're already going to disappoint you. They won't be there for you, they won't show up when you need them. But, I mean, now, in retrospect, I can see, and having lived for a little bit, I can see very clearly, especially in this context, right? Being a marginalized person in this country, what else would one want to do but escape? Why would you why would you try and be so righteous about trying to face your reality head on when it's just overwhelmingly devastating, But I realized that, particularly, like you say, it's not just individuals, it's whole communities, right? There are so many reasons to try and just numb something. And in fact, under the circumstances that most of us live in this country, those who don't turn to that's actually quite an interesting group of people. How is it that you didn't end up like that?
Yeah.
Because that's an important question to ask, and I think there are important answers for how we can imagine better and more conducive societies when we ask questions like that.
Let's talk about another identity, and you talk about many identities, or you at least challenge us to think about many identities in the book. Coloredness in Cape Town. And just let's close off the discussion around alcoholism. I always think that you can't you will be not fully grasping the idea of alcoholism in Cape Town in South Africa if you don't understand the history of the DOP system, for example, in this country, in Cape Town, and how we market alcohol in townships today, right? So it has its history. Let's talk about coloredness in Cape Town and in South Africa. Another misunderstood, and we don't want to talk about those stories, and I think this is what makes your book compelling, is that it is a story that needs to be told.
Yeah.
It is a community's stories that need to be told over and over again in South Africa, and it's we tend not to want to talk about those stories. So coloredness for you, and how you are challenging that. And by the way, this is where the Water slums comes from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that in itself is also quite it's a difficult thing to come to terms with, especially when faced with, in South Africa, the ways in which we want to speak about race and ethnicity in very neat ways, that conform to a set of, how can I put this, a set of ideas that follow on neatly from each other. But historically, the idea, so there are many things said about coloredness, the fact that it's an invention of apartheid, the fact that, it's a state of confusion, it's a state of denial, and, I think a lot of those sentiments come from a lack of interrogation with history. For me, and of course there are people who say, but you mustn't call yourself colored. It's not. It's offensive. It's derogatory. And I actually understand where all of that comes from. But my use very deliberately of the term is, for me, what it does is it allows me to speak about a history. It allows me to point to a trajectory of events that speaks, yes, about domination and oppression, but also about agency and resistance and survival. This is also the people today who either are considered colored or call themselves colored are also survivors of genocide, and exist in there are overlaps of histories, right? You'll find, very funnily, that somewhere along the line, a family history of ours might cross. And people, when they see us next to each other, they would never, ever understand or even suspect that, right? So I think what's important for me with this particular topic is expanding conversation. Conversations about history, conversations about the present, and also challenging our notions about race, what the meanings are that we attach to it, how we like to essentialize and biologize things like race. When we can have many more interesting conversations about the social consequences of such. And I think, so the way that my academic work also is centered around coloredness, and the framework of the lens through which I look at it is this idea of creolization, right? And the fact that there's an overlap between colonial histories and African histories. And those are not things necessarily that one likes to talk. I don't like the fact that I share a history with colonizers. I share bloodlines with colonizers. I don't. But it's also not something that I'm going to act like it doesn't exist, right? Because that robs us of a conversation to talk about, again, another element of how certain social systems came about in this country. So for me, the concept, the conversation, all of that is an opportunity to expand understandings and also open up conversations about who we are and how we got to where we are.
The book, your story, tells me that you've been an insider, but always an outsider. And here's another, category, a theme that you cover in the book: religion. And I don't want to ask an unnecessary question around Islam and sexuality and how you experienced yourself with all of those multiple identities, and then finding yourself, actually, do I belong? Do I not belong? What is your experience of religion as covered in the book, and even beyond, after you've written the book and you think, okay, let me reflect again?
I was recently asked about whether religion is a part of my life still, and I said, for the fact that it's such a, so when I talk about religion, I'm not necessarily speaking about an individual's religious practices or church mothers in communities and how they form relationships like that. That's of no interest to me. But when I do talk about religion, I talk about another system of domination, a system of power, right? And so from that perspective, because religion and different religions have hold different kinds of power in the world.
Yeah.
Because that's how it exists in the world, it will always be a part of my life, whether I subscribe to it or not. All right? Even being on the outside of religion is having a relationship to religion.
Yeah.
But what I have, I suppose, the process that I write about in the book and what I went through was really, there was a lot of anger directed to that system and so the system at large, but also the microcosm of a system that I was in. And so there was very much that need to go, I'm defying you out of anger. But now, I look back and I still have zero interest in subscribing. But I look back now and I can see for those who choose. So I think a lot of people expect that once you step out, you want to like alert everybody else to all the dangers and say, don't do this, do it like me. But I understand also that, like substances, religion is also a form of escape. It's also a place in which you get to exist differently to the way you have to exist in the world, right? When you are the status that you receive as a religious person, especially in your community, and there's an opportunity to tap into just one other form of importance, of sacredness, and so I see and I understand why it's useful and valuable, to other people. But for me, unfortunately, the cost for all of that is too high. The human cost of that is too high to say, yes, I experience all of these kinds of abuses, but this is what I get out of it. Whatever I get out of it can never justify any kind of abuse,
I'm going to open it up for questions. Can I just ask you a last question? So, as I read the book, put it down, read it, there is this powerful pic of yourself in the bathtub. I don't know if. And as I got there, I thought there is a very strong sense of you wanting us to pay attention to another issue in our society, which is mental health. So that pic was haunting for me, right? And then I got to the last one when you are out of the bathtub and the water is just, and I'm thinking, okay, we are okay.
Yeah.
So mental health, is it, am I reading it? Am I not reading it?
It's interesting. It's and this is one thing about the book and I thought about this yesterday, funnily. One thing about the book that I've really enjoyed that was an unanticipated outcome was all the interpretations of the imagery that people have sort of communicated. And I love it. I absolutely love it, because naturally everything that people see would not be what I intended.
Okay.
And in some ways, a question like that almost reminds me that even my subliminal, more subconscious thoughts communicated in the book will be picked up by the people who need it. And so yeah, I think, especially when I had to write like a blurb or something regarding the book, and it's basically the author saying what this book is about for them. I made the point of talking about this is not supposed to be a story about how one triumphs over hardship, even though that is what happens, but I don't want that to be the focus. I want the focus to be critiquing and attacking the violence that gets meted out to people. And so, of course, in instances, many instances in the book, but also just talking about the things that I talk about. The importance of realizing what these experiences do to people's mental health. And in the context of not having the language to name it for what it is, right?
Yeah.
We don't come from communities and families that acknowledge that it's okay to talk about such things. It's okay to name things. I mean, I come from a home where mental health terminology was just very loosely thrown around, but without much meaning, because we can never be the people who are actually going through those things, you know. So you're feeling not so great today, I'm depressed today. You know, you like to have things neat, oh, you OCD. But the ways in which these things get said is very dismissive.
Yeah.
Because it can't be made a real thing.
Yeah.
We can't say that we have those issues. And finally, I had aspirations of becoming a clinical psychologist.
Oh.
Yeah, I did. And so the funny thing about that is I identified very early on that I would want to be someone who helps people with mental health. But it came from the fact that I was denied the language to identify the issues with my own.
Yeah.
You know, and so I'm pleased that the images brought that out for you, because yes, it is a big part of the message being communicated in the book. It might not have been that explicitly mentioned or pointed out, but I think that's part of what the writing does, is that I obviously had to choose a set of focuses for the book, but with some level of skill, I would hope that I managed to take it in many different directions.
All right. I said it was my last question. My last question, because you mentioned it. The violence is not only symbolic, the church, right? The violence is also physical. It's real, especially in this country. Some of the horrors that we see of, or we hear about every day, of not accepting ourselves. It's really about not accepting ourselves, and therefore a violence against ourselves.
Yeah.
What's your thinking about current South Africa? We've made leaps and bounds. You know, our first discussion around pronouns.
Yeah.
You know, it's now part of our language every day, right? Wasn't language 10 years ago, 20 years ago. One thing that has not changed is that brutality that we see in our communities, of othering, of saying we're going to do corrective rape, or we're going to kill, and in gruesome ways. What's your take about South Africa, and what do we need to do other than educate, and educate?
It's, you know, any corner of South Africa, the ways in which people organize themselves and the way they choose to relate has so much to do with the success of the project of dehumanization. Yeah. For you to be able to get to the point of taking another life is in itself evidence of your own dehumanization. I mean, Maya Angelou said, I am human, and therefore nothing human can be alien to me. The point at which another human being is alien to you is the point at which you have lost your humanity. And so we have these conversations about education, and it's important. It is important, but it can only do so much. And of course, to be educated is one thing. To receive the education is another, right? And that is a decision. That is a choice. And so it's not always. The issue is not always that people do not have education. There are also choices that we make. And so I think we have to have, and unfortunately we are saddled with a leadership that is wholly inept to hold any of these conversations, nor do they have an interest. But to come out of the history that we come out of, and I say come out of a history as if it's in the past, it's not. We live with it now. But to come out of that and to do no real work around reinstilling this kind of humanity, yeah, and how when the dehumanization of people's living conditions have prevailed all this time, where do you even find the time to regard yourself as a human being when everything around you tells you that you're actually not and you don't matter, yeah? So, in spite of our wholly inept leadership, we really need to do a lot more work that I'm talking about deep human work that talks to rehumanization of people. We speak very flippantly about, we're all human beings. In theory, yes, but we don't spend enough time thinking about the effects, like I say, of the project of dehumanization, and the fact now that we exist in a society with a lot of people who cannot see their own humanity because it was removed from them. And so serious resources need to be invested into that project of rehumanization, because education can only do so much. You will not receive it if you cannot first and foremost realize that the person standing in front of you, however different they may be to you, is a human as much as you are, until the day that you realize, but you actually are also a human being.
Sure. All right. I knew that I'm a hog of conversations, but today I think I've just taken the cup. So let me ask a few questions on behalf of everyone who's joining us online, and thanks so much for the questions. How do you think we can address inclusion in society? Can I ask you the second one? Discrimination manifests in different ways. What has been some of your coping mechanisms to the discrimination you have faced?
It's an interesting question. And I spend a lot of time on social media, as we all know. And a big critique often about a critique against sort of social justice work. And the fact that there's an investment in reinforcing and reifying the ideas and the ideologies around social justice is that you people spend a lot of time in your echo chambers. You don't want to hear anybody else's opinion. For me, a very important way of dealing with the discrimination that I face is spending a lot of time in echo chambers. Echo chambers that are affirming.
Okay.
Echo chambers that are driven by love and self-regard. So for me, I've created a community of people where I can be vulnerable, I can be angry, I can express a wide range of emotions, and I won't be sort of judged for it or sort of shunned. But also people who have the ability to say to me, okay, maybe you need to think a little bit harder about this, So people who can also guide me and hold me accountable. I would have liked to live in a country whereby I could use, retributive resources to actually seek justice for discrimination, but it doesn't feel like a worthwhile thing to do, and I admit that I have very little confidence in the structures that have been provided for someone like me, for example, to seek retribution. And so I've made it a personal thing to, if not, to face the reality that I live in a country that doesn't care about whether somebody like me continues to live. To come to that realization, at the very least, for me, it's important then to create personal communities whereby the opposite is true. Yeah.
But the community of social media can also be very ruthless. That you
can.
navigate that very smoothly. You need to give me some tips. Tatum Davis asks, do you think we can legitimately ask to be loved or accepted before loving and accepting ourselves as individuals and within a community?
Yes. I know with the sentiment of, you can't you can't love anybody else if you don't love yourself, or you can't ask to be loved if you don't love yourself first. Even if you don't yet love yourself, you are still worthy of love. And it is a fair ask of those who are in relationship with you to do that. Those are two separate processes, and they can exist in parallel. But I feel like this expectation that we have to show up to relationships as some kind of fully formed whole before we are worthy of being loved or adored it's not necessary.
I'm trying to place you, I mean, from psychology to politics. You started off, with politics, and then you went history. This is a humanities and social sciences encounter. So you touching on all of those disciplines and influences. I can see how that. What's your PhD on again?
It's in critical diversity studies, but it is an interdisciplinary program.
Okay.
Yeah, so definitely.
Can I put you on the spot? When is Dr. Jamil coming?
I actually had this conversation this morning with Yaliwe, and June next year. That's the outer limit. But I will aim to complete before then. But doctor is coming some point next year.
We can't wait. Yeah, Dr. Silaboko, I'm hoping that we are funding this PhD one way or the other so that we can insert ourselves in the story. I'm going to advance, right?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'll connect up with this. I'm sure.
Can I put you on the spot?
Yes.
I actually applied for a doctoral scholarship when I started, and I was not even responded to.
Right. Okay. I knew that was going the wrong way. Okay. So, Kambale, I know that you are in the audience. I need you to find this application. I have not seen it. We will find the application. By the close of this conversation, we're going to find this application. All right. I should not have asked that question, but I will resolve. Tandogazi, you tried to save me and I ignored your question, and look at me now. Tandogazi May's question is this: this encounter is healing me. Thank you. As a queer indigenous person, I have often felt that I had to choose one struggle at a time by denying parts of myself to shine. I love the premise of this book. Well done to the author. I told you. I told you. Anonymous is also asking, what would you say to a parent, guardian raising a gay person? What do you want them to know about being queer? I ask because I don't want them to grow up feeling like they don't belong, like I did and still do in many spaces.
It sounds so simple, right? But there really can be no conditions to how you love and support your child. It's not how it works. And I think because heterosexuality as an assumption is such a fixed idea, it's a thing that everyone is destined for and it never changes. Um, because it is such a fixed idea, I think a lot of parents then will also struggle with the idea that once your child has come to you and expressed, or not, but however it happens, when you understand that your child is queer, the expectation is then that, okay, so that's the end of the conversation. I know this thing now, and this is how it will be until. And there must be a sense of willingness to understand that you have to be prepared to show up, to love all the moving and changing parts of your child. Because that's not where it will end, And 10 years down the line, they might have to tell you another thing about themselves that they had just discovered. And now you feel like, but we must already had this conversation. Why are you now bringing this thing in? So I really, and I feel like it has to do, the motivation for that has to do with how parents often almost, they write their children's lives before they are born.
Yeah, of course.
And the that script that they write has a lot to do with how this will reflect on them as people. And I think an important realization is that your children come from you, but they are not yours, And at some point, you do have to step back and just allow this person to take ownership of themselves, of their person, of their identity, and accompany them on that. Yes, you can guide and you can advise along the way, because there will be things that that can help them. But sometimes your child will teach you things, and you have to remain open to that process. So the question is about a gay son. Those were the specific words, right? But I think what I want to suggest is that parents always remain open to the evolution of their children. And first and foremost, always to place their love for their children at the forefront of that.
You spoke about your dad. I was hoping that at some point you're going to mention mom, sister, brother. Yay! Do you want to talk about your family and your own upbringing?
Yeah, I think for me, my mother swears she just didn't know. and I'm always like, okay, we'll go with that story if it makes you feel better. But so for that reason, with a sentiment like that, it was a very awkward, uncomfortable thing for me, because I suppose in some ways I wanted somebody to just see it and assure me that it's fine, man. I see it. Don't worry about it. But the opposite was done. It was ignored. It was it wasn't seen. It was we acted like it just wasn't there until I had to physically have the conversation, right? And so it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one because on the one hand, you don't want to enforce the timing of when we have this conversation, but on the other hand, you also don't want it to be ignored, right? And so, but I do think there are ways in which one can affirm your child for who they are without having to now outright go and acknowledge or name them for that. And so, for me, because that was the experience, I feel like my family in general missed out on a lot of opportunities to actually know me and understand who I am. Things that I say on public platforms about myself are things that my family's never heard because they've never asked. They've also not really created the opportunities for for me to display that, and for them to learn just on the job, if you will. And so that level of denial or silence is what characterizes our relationship. And so I don't have such close relationships because I'm now at a stage whereby it's all or nothing. I can't leave half of myself at the door. And I also can't present a version of myself to you for your comfort. And so for that reason, I engage with my family on an ad hoc basis.
Yeah. On a lighter note, when you start having PhDs and you're called doctor, you have very old family members creeping from woodworks because now in the family we have a doctor, right?
Yeah.
So, Paul Lukele is asking, do people really need to be educated on how to treat people decently? And the Bible can really never be used to display hate, as Jesus was about love. As far as I'm concerned, can I also get the last question? Dr. Hlongwana is asking, I enjoy this conversation. It's very much educational. My question is, why are we saying colored word is derogatory?
I do want to just get to Sipo's question.
Yes.
That was, so no, I don't think you can do that much work with education when trying to teach people how to be decent human beings. But I think this question speaks nicely to what I was saying earlier about doing the real work about rehumanizing people. That's not necessarily an education about, okay, so this is what LGBTQ people are and this is what this means. That's not what it is. It's about actually doing the real ideological and psychological work of reminding people that they are actually themselves human too. And that has got work to be done in an economic sense, it's got work to be done in a social sense, work to be done in a psychological sense. So to be clear also on the next question, I am not saying that the word is derogatory. However, there's a school of thought that that says because of the word itself, right? It seems to refer to a state of having color, right? So people find that referring to people in a way like that is extremely reductionist. And there's also a school of thought that, especially around the time where black consciousness took hold in South Africa, that the term should be rejected because it was basically used to separate people. And so just to briefly answer, that's where that school of thought comes from.
And your thinking is that you're using those terms also to challenge history, that. And if you can't name it, then you can't describe it, and you also can't describe the injustice that came with it.
Exactly. Right? You see, because if you're going to, I don't think we are at a stage whereby if we want to talk about injustices against black people in South Africa, I don't think we are at a stage of our consciousness where there's enough kind of nuance invested to see how different kinds of black people have different kinds of histories. And so if we want to have the conversation to say, yes, but colored people are black, that is fine. But when we say the word black, is that who comes up in our heads? Is that the image of the person that comes up? I don't think that's what happens. And so for me, the term allows a level of specificity to speak to a particular trajectory of history that, yes, overlaps and then diverges and overlaps again with other kinds of black people. But where we are now, for me, I don't see the value of letting go just yet as purely an analytical tool. Yeah.
All right. The last question from Chandu Ko. Chilongo, did you ever have to come out of the closet? That is, if you believe in the concept closet. I like that part. How did you experience that, and would you consider yourself to be an assimilationist or liberalist? Is that your... I don't know.
Okay, we'll answer that in two parts.
Yes.
I was unfortunately outed before I could have the conversation. I mean, in the time that I reached that stage of my life where this was a possibility of doing it, this thing was a possibility to do. I did see it that way, that I'm in the closet and I need to come out of it. And the way in which I do that is to sit my parents down and tell them. So I was outed, and for that reason, I was forced into a conversation. How I experienced it was interesting. It was quite confusing, actually, because I grew up being very close to my mother, and our closeness was constructed on this premise that it's the two of us against my father, because he's the ogre and the monster, you know, who does all these horrible things. And so I thought that at that time, whenever that happens, when I'm ready to do that, she would be the one that would be my ally, she would be the one who understands, but it was the complete opposite. My mother was the one who was upset and won't accept this and can't, you know, deal, and my father was the one who wanted to have a conversation with me about it. He wanted to understand. He asked me questions. He wanted to know does it mean this? Does it mean that? He didn't understand necessarily also the difference between being gay, as I identified at the time, and being transgender. So he wanted me to clarify that. But he gave me an opportunity to speak. And when I got it out, his response was to call my siblings shortly after that to say that this is what has happened. This is the conversation we've had, and I want for you to protect your brother. And that was very surprising to me. I never expected that. And then liberalist, assimilationist, neither. I am an anarchist.
Unfortunately, we have to wrap up this part of the conversation, Jamil, and we need to diarize the next conversation. And I want to ask you, are we waiting for the PhD first, or are we waiting for the next book, or is the PhD the next book?
Very, very smart question. We are definitely waiting for the PhD first. There will be no books until this PhD is done. The PhD is destined to become a book that hopefully the NIHSS will fund.
We'll fund the application.
Yes, the PhD was always destined to become a book. But yes, in that order, PhD book, next installment of what's already been written. So that's the order of events.
Any hints on the subject? Just hint.
You know, a lot of people want a sequel.
Yes.
And I am strongly considering that.
Okay.
And yeah, I think what I want to do, I don't know what it's going to look like, but what I think I want to do is I want to pull out some of the more subtle themes into more concrete, you know, explanations and conversations in the next book.
You consider yourself a writer?
I do.
You write very well. I suppose I'm reflecting my own anxieties around writing, and as I was reading this, I was thinking, wow, okay, right. With that, I want to close this conversation. It has been an important conversation for me personally. I'm hoping that everyone, as I was reading the questions, enjoyed the conversation. I want to encourage all of you to get a copy of the book, but because it's NIHSS, the first 50 people who logged in on our platform are going to get a signed copy from Jamil. And Jamil, thank you so much. Thanks to Jakana for unearthing new voices, new people, and making sure that the stories continue to be told. And I'm looking forward to the next conversation. And at that time, I'm going to say, "Oh, Dr. Jamil, so you can address us on the decoloniality of the decoloniality of the decoloniality." With that, thank you so much for joining me, and Jamil, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.